Part 62. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gongzi. Chapter 611. The moon is like a silver hook. Outside Suzhou City, thousands of miles of yellow sand are dotted with stars. Thousands of early blooming flowers rippled like waves with the wind. In the middle of the sea of flowers, the wooden house gave off a dim light. In the distance, you could see that the terraces and pillars were hung with red flower ribbons, and the windows were also pasted with festive stickers. Character. The sky and the earth were silent. Two figures came from a distance, holding hands and walking slowly in the dreamlike scenery. Their intermittent words disappeared and appeared in the wind. Ling I am your aunt. Not anymore, but you can still call me that, aunt. What aunt? That's what the child calls. By the way, according to the rules, whoever comes in first is the elder sister. If I enter now, Xiang'er and Xiaoqi will call me elder sister from now on, right? Well, it should be. What do you mean it should be? Your Majesty, you are a grown man, why can't you control your wife? But you are not allowed to control me. I have made an agreement in advance. If you don't even listen to me, I will go down and find you, the princess complained. Lu Hongluan held the hem of her skirt with one hand and walked slowly through the flowers. She kept talking in random directions, talking about whatever came to mind, hiding the tension and embarrassment in her heart. Su Buring held a lantern and pulled Lu Hongluan to walk in the sea of flowers, not in a hurry, not in a hurry. After all, the two of them hadn't taken a walk like this for a long time. From the moment they arrived in Chang'an, the two of them walked together. It was like this before and it will be like this in the future. They will never be separated. The so-called wedding is just a ceremony on each other's life journey. It is very important and must be done, but there is no way to do it. Add a little more to the relationship that is full of each other, because it is already full. Some love is plain and gentle, while some love is vigorous and ups and downs. For Su Buling, he prefers the former one. He can hold hands and grow old together in an ordinary way. Who would want to experience what kind of life and death are separated and reunited? With family by his side and people in front of him, he is already a noble family. The greatest blessing. While chatting, the two people came to the terrace of the wooden house. Su Buling opened the door of the wooden house, revealing the spacious living room inside. In addition to the wooden horses, swings and other objects he played with when he was a child, the most eye-catching thing is a huge bed, which is big enough to sleep 10 people, with a large mattress on it. The red bedding is embroidered with the Chinese characters Mandarin Duck and Happiness. There were red candles burning on the lampstand, and on the table where the ritual utensils were placed, there were 2 trays containing a phoenix crown and a set of red robes for the groom. Su Buling came to the dressing table and raised his hand. Aunt Lu, I will comb your hair and change your clothes. Lu Hongluan felt a lot more relaxed when she saw that there were no outsiders for miles around, only her and Su Buling. After hesitating at the door for a moment, he stepped into the wooden house and glanced around. Your child, are you serious? Su Buling looked helpless and shrugged his shoulders. Lu Hongluan clutched her skirt tightly. After hesitating for a long time, she still couldn't get rid of her baby bump. She slowly walked to the dressing table and sat down. She looked at her beautiful face in the mirror and her face turned red suddenly. Su Buling picked up the wooden comb, untied the bun and combed it gently. In the past, I often combed Lu Hongluan's hair, and she was quite good at this craft. It was very quiet in the large wooden house, with only the slight sound of the wooden comb passing through the black hair, and the sound of breathing that was sometimes rapid and sometimes gentle. Lu Hongluan looked slightly dazed, as if he had returned to the time when they were alone in Chang'an City. Looking at Su Buling combing her hair carefully in the mirror, she wanted to chat casually as usual, but at this moment, she couldn't find any topic. It wasn't until Su Buling had put her hair up and was about to change her skirt that she twisted her shoulders and whispered. "There is no groom to dress the bride. You go behind the screen and change, and I will do it myself." Su Buring pursed his lips and smiled. Without refusing, he picked up the red robe from the tray and walked behind the screen. Lu Hongluan stood up, her pearly steps in her bun trembling. She glanced at the red dress on the stage, seemed to think of something, and said, "Your Majesty, it seems that I am still the daughter-in-law of the Xiao family." Su Buling changed her robe behind the screen and said with a smile, "Xiao Qi is still your aunt. She has already written a letter to the Lu family to terminate the engagement." Lu Hongluan breathed a sigh of relief, then picked up the wedding dress and looked at it carefully. "You are quite thoughtful, don't peek." After saying that, he turned his back and untied the belt around his waist. At a time like this, Su Buling would naturally not peek at his aunt changing her clothes. Instead, he would act like a handsome gentleman and stand behind the screen waiting quietly. The rustling sound outside stopped for a long time, and then Lu Hongluan's voice came again. "Okay, come out." Su Buling walked out of the screen and looked up. Under the light of red candles, a woman dressed in a wedding dress was sitting upright in front of the embroidery bed. The flying phoenix pattern is outlined with gold thread on the waist, and it is tightly tied around the waist, outlining the round and graceful curves. The red embroidered shoes are tucked under the hem of the skirt. The hands are still folded on the waist, but they are obviously a little more mature than before. Shy and nervous. She seemed to be aware of his gaze and lowered her head slightly. Even though the hijab covers the beautiful face, the scene in front of you is still stunning and intoxicating. Su Buling paused and looked at it for a long time, then came to his senses, straightened his clothes, walked forward slowly, went to pick up the golden scale rod between the ritual utensils, and prepared to lift the hijab. Although Lu Hongluan was nervous and confused, she still remembered the wedding process. She realized that Su Buling's movements were wrong and said hurriedly, "You haven't paid your respects yet, you are the bridegroom, how can you just lift the hijab?" "Oh, I almost forgot." Su Buletinling patted his forehead, put down the scale beam, came to Lu Hongluan, and squatted down with his back to him. Lu Hongluan pursed her lips tightly under the hijab, carefully lay on the man's broad back, and hugged Su Buling's neck. Then with a slight movement of his body, he was carried on his back and walked out of the wooden house. This wasn't the first time he lay on Su Buling's back, but this time the feeling was completely different. Lu Hongluan felt like she was hiding a lot of words in her heart, but she couldn't say a word at this time. She was afraid that if she said a word, she would destroy the atmosphere that she had never dared to think about before. Strolling along thousands of flowers, we gradually came to the edge of Yuanyang Lake. The lake was sparkling, and under the bright moonlight, a small stone tomb stood quietly by the lake, with red candles also placed in front of the tomb. Su Buletinling slowed down a bit until he stopped in front of the tombstone. The past and present life have long been blurred, but the current feeling of knives in my heart is real. I can't suppress it, and I have never thought about suppressing it. Lu Hongluan got off Su Buling's back and knew where she was. She stood quietly beside Su Buling. She was silent for a long time before whispering, "Sister, I'm sorry, I will take care of your child from now on. Let's forget about the incident of burning yellow paper with me. I will change my name to your mother in the future, you can scold me if you want." Su Buling's expression was quiet. He stood upright in front of the tombstone and said softly, "Mom won't blame you. If Quan Xia knew about it, it would be too late to be happy." Lu Hongluan was silent for a moment and nodded slightly. "Just don't blame me, then, let's pay homage. Worship the heaven and the earth. Two bows to the high hall." In the silent sea of flowers, the man's voice trembled for unknown reasons. The Yuanyang Lake, which is as flat as a mirror, is dotted with stars, and a little red candle on the lakeside seems to be integrated with the sea of stars and the earth at the same time. If the heaven and earth are spiritual, you can definitely see it. Very far away, on the roof of the palace hall. The white-haired man in a python robe held an ordinary wine gourd in his hand, which contained broken jadeware brought from Chang'an. After Princess Su left, he never drank Duan Yashao again. It wasn't that he couldn't buy it in Ziliang, but the person who was drinking with him was no longer around, and even the best wine tasted boring. But tonight, obviously I have to take a few sips. Because no matter where that person goes, tonight, he will definitely look at the far northwest wilderness and the sea of flowers that each other has opened up bit by bit. The three most important people in her life are all here today. Suyu picked up the wine flask, raised his head and drank half of the wine. He raised his hand and sprinkled the cool wine on the ground at his feet. He muttered softly and let the wind blow. Our son is getting married today, and the bride is your favorite little sour radish. It's not easy. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 612. Outside Suzhou City, there is a bright moon and stars. The lights were on in the wooden house, red flower ribbons were hung on the terrace and pillars, and happy words were posted on the windows. Thousands of early blooming flowers rippled like waves with the wind. Among the sea of flowers, two figures held hands and walked slowly forward in the dreamlike scenery. Ling I am your aunt. Not anymore, but you can still call me that, aunt. What aunt? That's what the child calls. By the way, according to the rules, whoever comes in first is the elder sister. If I enter now, Xiang'er and Xiaoqi will call me elder sister from now on, right? Well, it should be. What do you mean it should be? Ling you are a grown man and you can't control your wife, you are not allowed to control me. I have made an agreement in advance. If you don't even listen to me, I will go down to find the princess complain. Lu Hongluan held the hem of her skirt with one hand and walked slowly through the flowers. She kept talking in random directions, talking about whatever came to mind, just to cover up the nervousness and embarrassment in her heart. Su Buring held a lantern and pulled Lu Hongluan to walk in the sea of flowers, not in a hurry, not in a hurry. After all, the two of them hadn't taken a walk like this for a long time. From the moment they arrived in Chang'an, the two of them walked together. It was like this before and it will be like this in the future. They will never be separated. The so-called wedding is just a ceremony on each other's life journey. It is very important and must be done, but there is no way to do it. Add a little more to the relationship that is full of each other, because it is already full. Some love is plain and gentle, while some love is vigorous and ups and downs. For Su Buling, he prefers the former one. He can hold hands and grow old together in an ordinary way. Who would want to experience what kind of life and death are separated and reunited? With family by his side and people in front of him, he is already a noble family. The greatest blessing. While chatting, the two people came to the terrace of the wooden house. Su Buling opened the door of the wooden house, revealing the spacious living room inside. In addition to the wooden horses, swings and other objects he played with when he was a child, the most eye-catching thing is a huge bed, which is big enough to sleep 10 people, with a large mattress on it. The red bedding is embroidered with the Chinese characters Mandarin Duck and Happiness. There were red candles burning on the lampstand, and on the table where the ritual utensils were placed, there were 2 trays containing a phoenix crown and a set of red robes for the groom. Su Buling came to the dressing table and raised his hand. "Aunt Lu, I will comb your hair and change your clothes." Lu Hongluan felt a lot more relaxed when she saw that there were no outsiders for miles around, only her and Su Buling. After hesitating at the door for a moment, he stepped into the wooden house and glanced around a few times. "Your Majesty, are you serious?" Su Buling looked helpless and shrugged his shoulders. Lu Hongluan clutched her skirt tightly, walked slowly to the dressing table and sat down. She looked at the beautiful face in the mirror, her face turned red suddenly, but she didn't know what to say. Su Buling picked up the wooden comb, untied the bun and combed it gently. In the past, I often combed Lu Hongluan's hair, and she was quite good at this skill. It was very quiet in the large wooden house, with only the slight sound of the wooden comb passing through the black hair, and the sound of breathing that was sometimes rapid and sometimes gentle. Lu Hongluan folded his hands on his waist and sat in a very standard posture. He looked at Su Buling in the mirror and wanted to say something, but couldn't find any topic. It wasn't until Su Buling had put her hair up and was about to change her skirt that she twisted her shoulders and whispered. "There is no groom to dress the bride. You go behind the screen and change, and I will do it myself." Su Buling pursed his lips and smiled. Without refusing, he picked up the red robe from the tray and walked behind the screen. Lu Hongluan stood up, her pearly steps in her bun trembling. She glanced at the red dress on the stage, seemed to think of something, and said, "Your Majesty, it seems that I am still the daughter-in-law of the Xiao family. This doesn't seem right." Su Buling was changing her robe behind the screen. Hearing this, he shook his head and said with a smile, "Xiao Qi is still your aunt. She has already written a letter to the Lu family to terminate the engagement." Lu Hongluan breathed a sigh of relief, then picked up the wedding dress and looked at it carefully. "You are quite thoughtful, don't peek." After saying that, he turned his back and untied the belt around his waist. At a time like this, Su Buling would naturally not peek at his aunt changing her clothes. Instead, he would act like a handsome gentleman and stand behind the screen waiting quietly. The rustling sound outside stopped for a long time, and then Lu Hongluan's voice came again. "Okay, come out." Su Buling walked out of the screen and looked up. Under the light of red candles, a woman dressed in a wedding dress was sitting upright in front of the embroidery bed. The flying phoenix pattern is outlined with gold thread on the waist, and it is tightly tied around the waist, outlining the round and graceful curves. The red embroidered shoes are tucked under the hem of the skirt. The hands are still folded on the waist, but they are obviously a little more mature than before. Shy and nervous. She seemed to be aware of his gaze and lowered her head slightly. Even though the hijab covers the beautiful face, the scene in front of you is still stunning and intoxicating. Su Buling stopped and looked at it for a long time before he came back to his senses, straightened his clothes, and slowly stepped forward to get the golden scale rod between the ritual vessels. Although Lu Hongluan was nervous and confused, she still remembered the wedding process. She noticed that Su Buling wanted to lift the hijab, and said hurriedly, "I haven't paid a visit yet. You are the groom who is welcoming the bride, how can you just lift the hijab?" "Oh, yes." Su Buling smiled slightly awkwardly, put down the scale beam again, came to Lu Hongluan, and squatted down with his back to him. Lu Hongluan pursed her lips tightly under the hijab, carefully lay on the man's broad back, and hugged Su Buling's neck. Then with a slight movement of his body, he was carried on his back and walked out of the wooden house. This wasn't the first time he lay on Su Buling's back, but this time the feeling was completely different. Lu Hongluan felt like she was hiding a lot of words in her heart, but she couldn't say a word at this time. She was afraid that if she said a word, she would destroy the atmosphere that she had never dared to think about before. Strolling along thousands of flowers, we gradually came to the edge of Yuanyang Lake. The lake was sparkling, and under the bright moonlight, a small stone tomb stood quietly by the lake, with red candles also placed in front of the tomb. Su Bulenling slowed down a bit until he stopped in front of the tombstone. The past and present life have long been blurred, but the current feeling of knives in my heart is real. I can't suppress it, and I have never thought about suppressing it. Lu Hongluan got off Su Buling's back and knew where she was. She stood quietly beside Su Buling. She was silent for a long time before whispering, "Sister, I'm sorry, I will take care of your child from now on. Let's forget about the incident of burning yellow paper with me. I will change my name to your mother in the future, you can scold me if you want. Su Buletinling's expression was calm, he stood upright in front of the tombstone, and said softly, Mom won't blame you. If I know someone under the spring, I won't be happy before it's too late. Lu Hongluan was silent for a moment, nodded slightly, and knelt down in front of the grave. Worship the heaven and the earth. In the silent sea of flowers, the man's voice trembled for unknown reasons. The Yuanyang Lake, which is as flat as a mirror, is dotted with stars, and a little red candle on the lakeside seems to be integrated with the sea of stars and the earth at the same time. If the heaven and earth are spiritual, you can definitely see it. Very far away, on the roof of the palace hall. The white-haired man in a python robe held an ordinary wine gourd in his hand, which contained broken jadeware brought from Chang'an. After Princess Su left, he never drank Duan Yashao again. It wasn't that he couldn't buy it in Ziliang, but the person who was drinking with him was no longer around, and even the best wine tasted boring. But tonight, obviously I have to take a few sips. Because no matter where the immortal goes, tonight, he will definitely look at the far northwest wilderness and the sea of flowers that have been opened up little by little. The three most important people in her life are all here today. Su Yu picked up the wine flask, raised his head and drank half of the wine. He raised his hand and sprinkled the cool wine on the ground at his feet. He muttered softly and let the wind blow. Our son is getting married today, and the bride is your favorite little sour radish. It's not easy. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 613. The first ray of sunlight in the morning sprinkled on the sea of flowers, and the early spring of February had already shown a myriad of colors. In the wooden house hung with red silk, the red candles burned out, the sake had been drunk and poured on the table, the floor was a little messy, the underwear and red skirt were thrown everywhere, and the belly band embroidered with gorgeous peonies was even hung on the swing, which might have been left accidentally when the two people were playing on the swing. The warm morning light entered from the window of the wooden house and sprinkled on the large and somewhat scary bed. Su Buling was lying in the middle. At first glance, it was like lying in a sea of red. Even with a slender and tall figure, he could only occupy a small space. The morning air was fresh and pleasant. Su Buling took a deep breath and exhaled. There was no intoxication after the wedding night in his eyes, but a bit of helplessness. It was called the wedding night, but in fact he was just serving his aunt. Lu Hongluan said she was not afraid and could do whatever she wanted, but a woman who had not experienced sex could not take her words seriously. She started to cry after a few seconds, not to mention cooperating. Su Buling was distressed, so he dared not go too far. He coaxed her gently for a long time, and finally coaxed her. Lu Hongluan started to scold him again, saying, I said it's okay, just treat me the way you treat Xiang. Su Buling had no choice but to obey and work hard, but after a few seconds, he started to complain again. This went on and on, sometimes breaking and sometimes sprinting, and almost killed Su Buling. However, the experience was still very good. The dual physical and psychological floating was really unstoppable. Su Buling curled the corners of his mouth and tilted his head to take a look. Lu Hongluan lay on Su Buling's arms, and all the emotions that had been suppressed in his heart for many years were released. All the worries and entanglements were completely put down at the moment of harmony, and the whole person seemed to be 10 years younger. At this time, her cheek was pressed against her chest, her eyes were closed and her breathing was gentle, her cheeks were still a little red, and she looked mature and beautiful. Su Buling looked down for a few times, and felt a little itchy. He gently lifted the edge of the quilt, looked inside for a few times, and reached his hand in. Lu Hongluan noticed something, frowned slightly, and instinctively pushed it, and then slowly opened her eyes. Seeing the familiar face and the smile, Lu Hongluan's eyes were a little dazed, and she woke up after a while. Her face was hot, and she slowly turned around in the quilt, facing the other side, leaving Su Buling with the back of his head. "Heartless, I've taken care of you for so many years in vain." The tone was a little aggrieved and complaining. Su Buling came up to her and took a look, then said softly, "Didn't you say that I can bully you in the same way as Xiang? Lu Hongluan wrapped herself tightly in the quilt, raised her eyes and pointed at the swing in the room. "I told you to treat me equally, but who told you to run away with me? It's just, I haven't heard Xiang say that you treated her like this." Su Buling was a little amused, knowing that Lu Hongluan was deliberately throwing a tantrum to cover up her embarrassment, and did not make any meaningless excuses, but comforted her softly. "It's still early, you can sleep a little longer." Lu Hongluan closed her eyes and did not answer, with a proud look of "I don't want to bother with you." Su Buling shook his head, turned over and landed on the ground, put on his robe, picked up the scattered clothes on the ground, folded them and put them on the tray. When she was about to leave, Lu Hongluan opened her eyes again, looking a little serious. "You are not allowed to leave. If you don't get up when you return to the palace, they will laugh at me. I will get up after a nap." Su Buling knew that Lu Hongluan would definitely not get up, so he took a plate of melon seeds from the table, walked to the terrace outside the house, sat down on the recliner, and said softly, "I'm outside, let's go back together later." "Yes." The sun rose, and the backyard of the Su Palace became busy. The kitchen was steaming, and the maids walked back and forth with various utensils. The girls from each courtyard also got up early and visited each other to say hello. Zhu Manzi was the most lively on weekdays, but it was obviously not good to be too presumptuous in the palace. It was a bit uncomfortable to keep the appearance of a good lady, so she secretly ran to find Yang and asked if there was any fun place in Suzhou City. Nightingale grew up in Suzhou, so she was naturally familiar with the story. Knowing that Manzi couldn't stay in the high-walled courtyard, she took a group of little sisters and ran out of the palace from the back door. Ning Yuhi and Zhongli Jiju were not used to staying in the palace, but as elders, they couldn't run around like little girls. They could only sit in the house and wait for their husbands to come back and arrange things for them. Xiaoqi was a workaholic. Although she hadn't married into the Su family yet, she had already regarded herself as a member of the Su family. After getting up in the morning and having breakfast, she came to the meeting room of the palace to learn about Ziliang's current family background from Su Wang and his staff and discuss the recent situation of the two countries. Xiao Xianger had been in the palace for 10 years, and it had become a habit for her to go to bed late and get up late. She would usually get up only when the sun was shining on her buttocks. But her best friend became a real sister with her last night, so such a big thing naturally couldn't be neglected. In the past, Xiao Xianger was caught cheating in bed by Lu Hongluan, and she was often ridiculed by Lu Hongluan. She changed from a dignified and loyal Empress Dowager to a desperate handicraft expert, which was largely due to Lu Hongluan's jealousy. After finally dragging her best friend into the water, how could she miss the opportunity to turn the tables? As soon as the sky brightened, Xiao Xianger climbed out of her boudoir, dressed beautifully, and then forcibly dragged Jiao Yi, who had the same schedule as her, out of bed and went to the kitchen to make soup. Jiao Yi is the same age as Xiao Xianger and has been with her since she was a child. She saw her young lady busy cooking the food herself. She thought for a moment and sighed quietly. "Miss, this is unfair. Miss, you have been wronged." Xiao Xianger had an apron hanging on her body and was humming a tune as she walked back and forth in the large kitchen. When she heard the words, she said in confusion, "Why am I wronged?" Jiao Yi was cutting black-boned chicken and yams beside her and said softly, "The young lady's identity cannot be seen in the light, and she can only appear with the same identity as the eldest lady." Madame Lu is different. Now that she has remarried, she is considered to be the serious wife of the young prince. Xiao Xiang'er blinked her apricot eyes. Aren't they all the same? Why do you have to see the light of day? Qiao Yi's eyes showed a hint of resentment. There is a difference. Mrs. Lu married the young prince, and the happiest one was Yunu. She was a maid in marriage. If the young lady remarried, she would naturally remarry as well. She didn't sleep all night last night, and she was still busy late at night. He came over and said something mean to me. I am still sleeping with you in the Queen Mother's mausoleum, and I have no chance to remarry. After all, I am not as good as you, slave. I am your personal bodyguard. Maid, why should I be inferior to Mrs. Lu's maid? Xiao Xiang'er blinked and understood. That's right. I almost forgot about this. You are already a grown man. Do you want to get married? Qiao Yi stopped chopping vegetables and smiled a little shyly. I am satisfied that I can accompany the young lady. I don't want to get married. Xiao Xiang'er really felt sorry for the silly maid she had accompanied since childhood, and said with a smile, it doesn't matter, Su Buling and I will say hello in a few days. Oh, I'm so embarrassed. Ask him to choose a mighty young general for you from the Ziliang army. My maid will naturally be your wife. I guarantee that I will envy you, the dead moon slave. Qiao Yi's expression froze, and after a moment of confusion, she quickly shook her head. If I can't be by my lady's side, Qiao Yi, I would rather never marry. I just said it casually and have no intention of getting married. Xiao Xiang'er was a little surprised. You don't want to arrange a young general for you? Are you stupid to be a maid? I'm not stupid, I just can't bear to leave you, miss. I won't say anything anymore, the pot is boiling dry. Oh. Xiao Xiang'er has been well dressed and well fed since he was a child. He doesn't know how to cook, so he hurried over to add water to make soup. The master and servant had been busy for most of the day, and a delicious bowl of black-bone chicken, red dates, and yam stew was ready. Xiao Xiang'er packed the food box, took Qiao Yi out of the palace, and took a ride on the carriage to the Sea of Flowers outside the city. Xiao Xiang'er sat in the carriage, secretly thinking about how to mock her best friend later. She knew Lu Hongluan best, and had a bad temper. She must have suffered a lot last night just to compare with her. In the morning definitely can't get up. It's still early, maybe we can have sex with her in front of the bride. I'm quite excited when I think about it. Qiao Yi wrapped the food box listlessly and sat in front of Xiao Xiang'er. She wanted to mention the matter of sleeping with her several times, but it was obviously not easy to say this. As a maid, her status will not change much after she becomes a servant. According to the young lady's arrangement, if she chooses a 4th or 5th grade military officer in Ziliang to be her main wife, she will simply fly up a branch and become a phoenix. Anyone with a discerning eye knows how to choose, but the young prince is currently a man, and he is reluctant to let go of the young lady who has been with him since childhood. How could she choose a rough man from the border army to marry? The master and the servant just sat in the carriage with their own thoughts, getting closer and closer to the Sea of Flowers. I don't know where I'm going when I hear camel bells ringing outside the carriage, and a woman's voice reciting poetry. Far above the Yellow River, among the white clouds, there is an isolated city called Wanren Mountain. Why should the Qiang flute blame the willows? The spring breeze does not reach Yumen Pass. The voice is sweet and light, with a bit of childishness, just like the otherworldly forest fairy singing by the pond. It is very recognizable. Once you hear it once, you will basically never forget it in your life. The two masters and servants in the carriage sat up at the same time after hearing this, looking a little confused, and then their faces turned pale at the same time, showing an expression of what the hell, what the hell. Qiao Yi had been a maid in the palace for 10 years. As a female official of Changle Palace, she naturally went to the Queen's palace to pay her respects. When her voice reached her ears, She recognized who it sounded like and shrank her neck in fright. Not to mention Xiao Xiang as the Queen Mother, if she can't even hear her daughter-in-law's voice, then her ears will be in vain. Xiao Xiang's eyes were startled and surprised. After hesitating for a moment, she hurriedly opened the curtain and took a look outside. On the straight official road, two large camels were walking slowly forward. The carriage of Prince Su's mansion caught up from behind and just passed by. Walking on the back of a camel behind, a beautiful woman in a floral skirt sat sideways between the humps, with a garland of flower branches on her head, looking at the wilderness in the distance and whispering poems. There is a rope tied to the camel, and behind it is a dustpan made of woven rattan. The little black dog is sitting on it with his head drooped and being supported while walking, looking at the master on the camel with a helpless look. Xiao Xiang opened the car curtain. The window was as high as the woman on the camel. When she saw a side face, her body shook violently. How is this possible? Kui Zioan was riding a camel slowly. From the corner of her eye, she noticed that the curtain of the passing carriage had been opened. Someone was staring at her and turned around to glance at her. Their eyes met, and the desolate desert world seemed to freeze at this moment. Queen Kui. Mother? Why are you here? Aren't you dead? You died of illness. Aren't you dead too, cremated? After the inexplicable short conversation, there was complete silence between heaven and earth, and even the carriages and camels stopped. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 614. Phew. The breeze blew up the thatch on the official road. The little black dog squatted on the dustpan and waggled its tail. It looked at its master in confusion and looked at strangers passing by. The scene was very embarrassing. In front of the carriage, the two palace guards driving the carriage picked up the sabers in their hands and looked at the old man, the young man and the dog next to him with some confusion. Eunuch Chia, who was dozing in a cloth robe, turned around when he heard the sound, glanced briefly, was stunned for a moment, hesitated a little, and said, "It's a sin." The familiar male duck's voice obviously woke up the stunned Xiao Yi and Xiao Xiang. When Xiao Xiang saw Eunuch Chia on the camel in front of her, her eyes were even more incredible, but she reacted very quickly, forced herself to calm down, and acted like Miss Xiao. "Queen Kui, you have recognized the wrong person. I am Xiang's sister, Xiao Qi. You should have heard of it." Kui Zioan rarely had contact with people in the palace, but it was not impossible. They were mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, and it was not uncommon for her to support Empress Dowager Xiao when they appeared together at formal occasions such as sacrificial ceremonies. Because Xiao Xiang is also indifferent to fame and wealth, and only likes fancy objects, Kui Zioan's sense of them is still very good, at least much better than other people in the palace. Seeing Xiao Xiang alive at this time, Kui Zioan actually showed a bit of joy on her face. She raised her finger and pointed inside the carriage. "Mother, how can you be Miss Xiao? Are your maids also twins?" "Well." Xiao Xiang who was pretending to be calm, had a stiff expression. The stunned Xiao Yi shrank her neck and tried to hide, but it was too late. Kui Zioan sat sideways on the camel and looked at Xiao Xiang carefully. "On the way here, I heard Lao Jia say that my mother committed suicide because of the fratricide between the Song brothers. It's a pity that I came here. It's good that my mother didn't die, but why did you come here?" Xiao Xiang's expression was stiff, and she turned to look at Eunuch Jia in front of her, not knowing how to calm down. Eunuch Jia served for a year in the palace, and the emperor served 3, not to mention the queen. I saw two acquaintances meeting each other, with complicated expressions on their wrinkled faces. After a long time, they sighed. "I have retired from the palace and don't care about anything now. The Queen Mother and the Empress, please chat slowly while I go to the front to take a look at the scenery." As he spoke, he drifted away. Xiao Xiang's ruxing eyes were filled with embarrassment. Looking at Kui Zioen's innocent eyes, she felt a little bit more inexplicably ashamed. She pursed her lips, hesitated for a long time, and then nodded slightly. Xiao Wan, I didn't expect to be recognized by you. I am indeed not dead. You also know that the palace is not for people. I couldn't live in it anymore, so I found an opportunity to sneak out. How did you get out of the palace? Kui Zioen fully understood the situation in the palace, and there was nothing strange in her eyes. She jumped off the camel, ignored the guards outside, climbed into the carriage, and got into the carriage. Xiao Xiang'er's expression was slightly stiff, and she instinctively sat up a little straighter, assuming the Queen Mother's manner that she had almost forgotten. Kui Zioen held up her skirt, sat down in front of Xiao Xiang'er, and said seriously, "My father and the Emperor's schemer sent me out, and I have been hiding in the Sea of Peach Blossoms in Yuzhu." Oh. Xiao Xiang'er thought about it for a while and guessed the cause and effect of the matter. In fact, she had always felt that Kui Zioen was a poor person, and her death was too sudden. She originally suspected that Song Ji got angry and killed Kui Zioen. Now it seems that the hidden secret is still there. Quite a lot. Kui Zioen was still very talkative when facing acquaintances she didn't dislike. She sat next to her and asked seriously, "Mother, you secretly ran out of the palace, why didn't you go back to the Xiao family in Jiangnan? Doesn't your family want you anymore?" Talking about a mother and a queen made Xiao Xiang'er feel uncomfortable all over, but even if the two of them were really dead, they were still the legitimate queen mother and empress of the Dayu dynasty, so they could not deny this relationship. Xiao Xiang'er was panicking to death, and her expression was even more embarrassing. She thought for a moment. "Well, my sister is getting married in Suzhou. They will get married in a few days. I will come with her to have a look." Kui Zioen looks very innocent, but she was isolated from the world of mortals when she was born. She always looks at people and things from a bird's-eye perspective, just like an expert looks at all living beings. She can detect things that are wrong in ordinary people's speech and behavior. You can tell at a glance whether she is sincere or not even Song Ji can deceive her. Kui Zioen knew that Xiao Xiang'er was lying, but she didn't continue to ask further questions. She believed this reasonable excuse and nodded. Xiao Xiang'er was restless. Maybe she felt that they were in the same boat and wanted to be more intimate. She held Kui Zioen's arm and asked softly, "Xiao Wan, aren't you living in seclusion in the peach blossom forest? Why did you and eunuch Jia come to Suzhou?" Kui Zioen has a strong misophobia, but Xiao Xiang'er is obviously very clean. She has been in contact with her in the palace, and she didn't show any disgust. She said softly, "Eunuch Jia said that the emperor might send someone to silence me. I was living a good life, so why did I have to die? So I ran away." Oh, Song Ji's decisive temper makes it possible for him to do this. I'm asking you, how do you run to Suzhou? This is King Su's territory. It would not be good if you are found alive. Kui Zioen blinked her eyes. "Don't worry, mother. During the 12th lunar month, I met a young man in the peach blossom forest. He was a very down-to-earth man. After eating my food, he would fish for me to repay my debt, and he also read me many poems." Xiao Xiang'er frowned and realized something was wrong. When that person left, he saw that I was bored living alone, so he said that there was a big sea of flowers at home and asked me to live in his house. Xiao Xiang'er's face sank slightly, and flames gradually appeared in her eyes. "I didn't want to come at first, but I was afraid that the emperor would find me, so I came anyway. I heard from Lao Jia that that man is the son of King Su. I think he is a good man and will not hand me over to the emperor." "This is no nonsense. How could he hand you over to the emperor?" Xiao Xiang'er's eyebrows stood up in anger, and she pulled Kui Zioen tightly. "That bastard, the one who kidnapped you." Kui Zioen was a little unhappy when she heard the name bastard, and shook her head. He is very nice. I just came here to ask him to borrow a place to stay and help him raise flowers and pay for the house. If he doesn't agree, I will go back. Xiao Xiang'er's chest was rising and falling, and there was a complicated look in her eyes. Even the idiot aunt lied to the family. This guy is too much. Kui Zioan noticed something was wrong with Xiao Xiang'er and said doubtfully, "Mother, do you know him?" Xiao Xiang'er gritted her teeth and responded, "He is my brother-in-law, so I naturally know him." Brother-in-law. Kui Zioan's eyes were blank for a moment. Then shouldn't I call him uncle? He is younger than me. No, my mother is 1 year older than me. How could he marry your sister? How could Xiao Xiang'er have the time to answer this question? Her mind was filled with the scene of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law sleeping together. If Kui Zioan was a normal girl, that would be fine. She wouldn't say anything about her own choice. But Kui Zioan is obviously mentally immature. In her opinion, she is no different from a little girl of several years old. How could Su Buring abduct such a simple girl into the back house for his own selfish desires? The more Xiao Xiang'er thought about it, the angrier she became. Kui Zioan regarded her as an elder, so naturally she regarded Kui Zioan as a junior. She held Kui Zioan's hand and said, "Xiao Wan, don't worry, I'll go and get an explanation from him right away, and I'll make sure you are settled well." Kui Zioan smiled, "I can go by myself. It's been a long time since I last saw him. I miss him a lot." Xiao Xiang'er rubbed her forehead and had nothing to say. After the carriage stopped at the Sea of Flowers, Xiao Xiang'er asked Jiao Yi to take care of Kui Zioan, got out of the carriage, took the saber from the door, and walked into the Sea of Flowers. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 615. 3 Poles in the Sun. Su Buling was sitting on the deck chair on the terrace, looking at the small cradle with bells tied next to it. His childhood days and nights flashed back in his mind, as if he was in another world, but so close before his eyes that he didn't know what expression to make to Sai. The past and the present. In the wooden house, Lu Hongluan squinted for a long time, and then gradually recovered. He was still sore somewhere, and even his eyebrows slightly frowned. He whimpered, but quickly covered his lips, obviously not wanting Su Bu let in outside. Ling heard. "Ms. Lu, are you awake?" "What is Mrs. Lu, no big or small?" Lu Hongluan was obviously in a good mood. He suppressed the shyness in his heart and returned to his natural state. He slowly got up from the quilt and crawled a long way before climbing to the edge of the big bed. After putting on her dress, she put the folded white handkerchief into her arms, her face turned red, and she walked to the door holding onto the wall. Su Buletin Ling stood up with gentle eyes. "If you're tired, just take a rest and don't be pushy." Lu Hongluan stood up straight, assumed a dignified and steady posture, and hummed softly. "I'm not tired at all, you are." Su Buling shook his head and smiled, "I'm not tired, and I didn't put in much effort last night." Lu Hongluan's eyes darkened slightly, with a 3-point threat. "Are you tired?" Su Buling's expression froze and he blinked, "Tired?" Lu Hongluan was then satisfied and continued, "How tired are you? Are you unable to stand up?" Su Buletin Ling had a strange expression, but when he saw Lu Hongluan's fierce eyes, he still couldn't resist. Nodding seriously, holding his right hand on his waist and his left hand on the wall. "It's a bit, alas." Lu Hongluan nodded with satisfaction and said with a smile, "When Xiang'er comes later, you will be like this. You must not be lively." Su Buling's eyes were full of helplessness. "Aunt Lu, making a man unable to stand still on the wedding day doesn't seem to be something worth showing off. I still need you to teach me. Just to make Xiang'er angry and let her understand that she is afraid of being bullied by you, but I am not afraid of being bullied by you. No matter how powerful she is, I won't be afraid." Su Buling held it in for a long time, but still couldn't hold it back and slapped Lu Hongluan on the buttocks. Snap! Lu Hongluan shivered, and then there was shame, anger in his eyes. He raised his hand and returned Su Buling a few times. Damn boy, your wings are hard, right? You dare to hit me? Su Buling held Lu Hongluan's wrist with a smile and looked outside the flower sea. Stop making trouble, Xiang'er is here, huh? Why are you still carrying something? Lu Hongluan quickly put away her shy expression, coughed slightly, and stood on the terrace with her head held high, as if her sister had seen her sister coming to say hello. She also glared at Su Buling and motioned for him to hold onto the wall. Among the flowers, Xiao Xiang'er, whose face turned red and white, was holding a red skirt in her left hand and a knife in her right hand. She was walking quickly on the path. The steps were relatively long and heavy, and her clothes were shaking. It looks quite spectacular. Lu Hongluan narrowed her eyes slightly, straightened her chest out instinctively, and said doubtfully. Why is Xiang'er holding a knife? Are you planning to chop me? I'm not angry with her yet. Su Buling was holding onto the wall, a little confused. No. Xiao Xiang'er walked near the wooden house and was shocked when she saw Su Buling holding onto the wall and looking like he was squeezed dry. However, he quickly put away the slight shock and ran up to the terrace with wide eyes. Lift the knife and chop. You bastard, scum, hypocrite. Su Buling was caught off guard and really startled. He hurriedly grabbed Xiao Xiang'er's wrist, took the knife away, and threw it into the painting field. Baby, what's wrong? Where did I go wrong? No, I did everything wrong. Why are you so angry? Don't worry, don't worry. Lu Hongluan also noticed that Xiang'er was really angry. He put away his sarcastic thoughts and stepped forward to hold Xiang'er's hand. Yes, Xiang'er, have you lost your mind and gone crazy? He is your husband-in-law. Xiao Xiang'er's face turned red, and she grabbed Su Buling's collar and dangled it. Damn boy, what do you mean? Please explain it clearly to me. Su Bulenling's scalp was numb. He didn't know what he meant. He quickly hugged Xiang'er who had fried hair and said softly. Don't be angry, baby, what's wrong with me? Wasn't it fine yesterday? Xiao Xiang'er twisted her shoulders a few times and said angrily, tell me the truth, how many women do you have outside? When Lu Hongluan heard this, he stopped arguing for a moment, calmly stopped his hand, and said softly. Your Majesty, please tell me quickly, Xiang'er will be so angry. Su Buling was confused and thought carefully about it. There are no women outside, just these few in the house. Are you still lying to me? Why don't you tell me? Su Bulenling was at a loss. Seeing that Bao Bao was so confident, he felt a little weak. But no matter how fake it is, there are really no women out there, so he can't just make it up. Xiao Xiang'er stared for a moment. Seeing that Su Buling seemed a little confused, her annoyed look faded a little, and she asked coldly. What happened to Queen Kui? Su Buling's eyes were full of confusion. Queen Kui has been dead for several years, and I have never even seen her. How can this have anything to do with me? Lu Hongluan was also a little confused. Yes, Xiang'er, Queen Kui has been dead for many years, what does it have to do with Ling'er? Could it be that Queen Kui is entrusting a dream to your mother-in-law? In a dream? Everyone is coming. Xiao Xiang'er pinched Su Buling's waist with her hand. You dare to say that you don't know Queen Kui? Su Buling shook his head seriously. I don't know him, I haven't seen him before. Xiao Xiang'er blinked her eyes lightly, thought about it for a moment, and then said, didn't you say that you met a woman in Yuzhu? Su Buling nodded, yes, I told you this, and I didn't hide it. She's just a little village girl, and Queen Kui, his dash. Su Bulenling's eyes were filled with shock. Seeing Su Buling's shocked expression, Xiao Xiang'er also realized something was wrong. That village girl is Queen Kui, didn't you recognize her? Su Buling's mind was in a mess. He spread his hands and said. How can I recognize this? I have never seen Kui Zioan, I have never seen a portrait, and she has been dead for several years. That girl is a little village girl, who can relate to her? Xiao Xiang'er thought about it and felt that it was indeed the case. If she hadn't lived with Kui Zioan in the palace for several years, she would never have thought of it. Thinking of this, Xiao Xiang'er felt a little calmer and said again. What have you done to people? Su Buling shook his head. I didn't do anything. Still saying no. I ate her half a pot of rice, caught 25 fish for her, read a few poems, and then left. We were innocent. Have you ever said that you would take her back to Suzhou to see the Sea of Flowers? Well. Su Buletinling's expression froze. Seeing that Xiang'er was about to explode again, he quickly said. As I said, I saw a poor girl hiding in the mountains. She might get into trouble one day, so I thought about letting her settle down in Suzhou so that she could be taken care of. Xiao Xiang'er took a few breaths and raised her hand to point outside. Now that they are here, what are you going to do? Ah! Su Buling was startled for a moment, then showed a bit of surprise, and then was pinched by Xiao Xiang'er again, grinning and saying. Baby, don't be ridiculous. We're just friends. It's nice to be here. Go out and have a look. Lu Hongluan heard that Queen Kui was alive and ran to the door of Su Buling's house. She was obviously confused and had not yet recovered from the massive impact of information. She frowned and followed behind to analyze the current situation. Xiao Xiang'er had already analyzed it on the way over. Ming Yan's cheeks were red and she pinched Su Buling's waist. You are so promising. What do you want to do? You have eaten this queen mother, and now you have brought the queen here, and you also brought a chief steward with you. The harem team is better than Song Jiju, and you have to dress up in a dragon robe and get a jade seal. No, you even have Yuxi. Are you planning to take over Songji's job? He is trying to seize power and bribe princes and ministers. What do you mean by moving the harem back? Su Buling didn't dare to fight back. He looked calm and easygoing and said softly. Don't get so angry. I met that girl by chance. I really don't know her identity, and I have no intention of harming her. What virtues do you have that I don't know yet? You've come here. Well. Su Buling was speechless, comforted Xiang'er, and quickly came to the edge of the Sea of Flowers. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 616. At the entrance to the Sea of Flowers, a carriage and a camel stopped at the door. Two palace guards and the maid Chiao Yi stood together with strange expressions on their faces, whispering in low voices, seemingly discussing the current situation. The Queen Mother, Empress, Chief Chamberlain, palace maids, said this was the royal garden, and there seemed to be no problem. On the high white wall, Eunuch Chia stood with his sleeves folded and his waist bent, looking out at the vast scenery of the northwest. The expression on his face was somewhat inexplicable. See you soon. I have lived for almost 80 years, and since the founding of Daewoo, I have seen the resumption of troubled times. This is indeed the first time I have seen this strange situation. Well, this life is not in vain, and this trip is not in vain. The little black dog that came from the east, traveled thousands of miles, and rushed to the west, probably knew where it was, jumping around like a rabbit among the flowers, chasing the colorful butterflies among the February flowers. Kui Zioan held up her skirt and turned around in the sea of flowers. Her clear eyes scanned the boundless sea of flowers in front of her. She was obviously stunned. She never concealed the happiness on her face, but this must be the first time she was so happy. I have been growing flowers since I was a child, just to grow such a sea of flowers with no end in sight. The wild world in the northwest is vast. Apart from the blue sky and the earth, there is only the sea of flowers, as if we have reached the end of the world. This place is so beautiful. Laochia, I will live here from now on. After Kui Zioan was initially stunned, she slowly returned to her usual appearance, bent down, and began to look for flaws in the sea of flowers. Such a large area of flowers cannot be planted as perfectly as OCD, and it has been there for many years. If you look carefully, it is a bit uneven. Eunuchia stood on the wall, shook his head and said with a smile. The old slave can't be the master. Ask that person if he is willing or not to take you to other places. He is here. Kui Zioan looked up after hearing this, and sure enough, she saw 3 people walking towards the end of the sea of flowers. The handsome young man among them was the one huddled behind the earthen stove in the canyon, making a fire. Kui Zioan's eyes showed a little joy, and she raised her hand and shook it. Hey, come here quickly. Su Buling smiled when he saw the impressed little village girl. He is indeed worried about the safety of the little village girl. When he is on his own territory, at least he will be able to happily grow flowers for the rest of his life. If he can protect the little village girl, he will be satisfied with his life. As for other things, it would be unsightly to force too much. When Lu Hongluan saw that it was Empress Kui, her steps obviously slowed down a bit, and she whispered. It's really Queen Kui, this mess. Your daughter still calls her aunt. Xiao Xiang'er had recovered her manners as the Queen Mother, walked in front and gritted her teeth and said. You still know about chaos? You taught Su Buletin Ling. What kind of chaos did you teach? Lu Hongluan thought for a while and felt that Linger was a bit too much. He raised his hand and twisted Su Buling's waist. Su Buling's waist was almost swollen from being pinched by Aunt Bao Bao, but his expression was calm. When he heard the voice, he raised his hand to wave. The little black dog still had fresh memories of being knocked unconscious with a stick. After discovering Su Buling, he was obviously a little frightened. He hid behind Kui Zioan, stuck his head out and barked twice. Su Buling came to the front and said with a smile, Girl, why are you here? Kui Zioan put her hands behind her back, leaned forward slightly, and said crisply. I wanted to come over, so I came over. As he spoke, he glanced around and said hello. Mrs. Lu, you are here too. Lu Hongluan had stayed in Chang'an for many years. As Mrs. Jioming, she had naturally met Kui Zioan. After hesitating for a moment, he slightly possessed. Meet Queen Kui. Kui Zioan didn't like the status of queen, but when she glanced at Xiao Xiang'er, it wasn't easy to clear up the relationship. After all, she still knows that elders and younger ones are superior to each other. She has the nerve to directly deny her identity when her mother-in-law is here. Kui Zioan hesitated for a moment, but returned the gift seriously, and then said, Mother, I am already dead, can you not call me queen? Xiao Xiang'er agreed with this move and nodded quickly. Su Buling was a little amused and said softly, Queen Mother, you all have come out of the palace and have nothing to do with your previous identity. Just be yourself with peace of mind. Kui Zioan smiled and looked at Su Buling. Hey, I live here, how about you build me a small house and I grow flowers for you? What Su Buletin Ling could say, he couldn't push him away even if he came. He nodded gently, raised his hand and pointed to the center of the sea of flowers. There is a small cabin there, you can stay there. Kui Zioan nodded, probably because she felt that the exchange was fair, and without any intention of thanking her, she led the little black dog to the center of the sea of flowers. Then I'll stay. Don't let anyone come to me. You can come over. I know the Queen Mother and Mrs. Lu, and that's fine too. Forget about other people I don't know. One person and one dog, just walking away through the sea of flowers. Although Su Buling's contact was brief, he also knew that Kui Zioan had a free and easy temper, and naturally he had no intention of being a guest in the palace. Xiao Xiang'er watched Kui Zioan pass in front of her. After walking further away, she looked at Su Buling. "You're just going to live like this? What will you do next?" Su Buling chuckled, "The sea of flowers always has to live alone, and we will talk about the future." Xiao Xiang'er looked back for a few times, but Kui Zioan didn't even mean to look back, and walked away in a moment. She sighed, thought about it, and pinched Su Buling's waist again. "You are a troublemaker. I told you that Kui Zioan is my daughter-in-law after all, and I can't just ignore her. She is also a poor person. Since you have taken her in, you have to take care of her for the rest of her life. If you don't have the patience, you shouldn't provoke her and harm her." Su Buling nodded, "Don't worry, Suzhou City is safer than the Emperor's feet. As long as I don't let anyone disturb her, she can live alone as long as she wants. Let's go back to the palace and tell my father." Ah! Xiao Xiang'er and Lu Hongluan didn't know what to say. After stopping for a moment, they followed Su Buling out of the sea of flowers. Su Buling came to the wall, looked at the eunuch Jia standing on it, raised his hand and saluted. "Eunuch Jia, you retired from the court. I thought you had returned to your roots. Why did you come to Suzhou?" Eunuch Jia sighed and bowed slightly. "I am old and have nothing to do now, so I followed Miss Kui to see the world." Su Buling could hear the teasing, and it was difficult to defend himself, so he nodded. "Eunuch Jia can stay in Suzhou. I will visit you another day and ask for your advice." Eunuch Jia smiled lightly and did not refuse. Xiao Xiang'er met the familiar Eunuch Jia. Her face was obviously a little embarrassed. She said nothing, lowered her head and got into the carriage. Su Buling talked for a few words, and did not disturb the respected martial arts master again. He took Lu Hongluan out of the sea of flowers and walked towards Suzhou City not far away. "Thank you Liuj King for the reward. Thank you for the 10,000 yuan reward from someone X. Please like and give me a monthly ticket. The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 617. In the study room of the prince's mansion, the core staff of Prince Su's mansion were sitting quietly on their chairs, looking back and forth between Prince Su and the young prince. The meaning was inexplicable and difficult to describe. The Queen Mother is Prince Su's aunt, the Queen is Prince Su's sister-in-law, and the Crown Prince is Prince Su's son, alas. Xiao Qi sat in front with a teacup, lowering her head and sipping the tea, with the same strange eyes. "I really want to pretend that I don't know the fiancé next to me, but this is obviously unrealistic. At this time, I feel a little regretful for participating in Ziliang's political affairs in advance." Su Wangsuyu looked at his stern and extraordinary son. His expression changed many times in a short period of time. Even he didn't know what his mood was. "Guess it, it's obviously wrong. This kidnapped the emperor's aunt and first wife back, and if he praised them a few times, he might bring someone back with him in the future. It's even worse to scold him. How proud you are. If you are unkind, don't blame me for being unjust. You have already put a dragon poison on my son. Is it a problem for my son to sleep with your mother and your wife?" Suyu thought about it for a long time, but finally couldn't comment on the matter, so she looked at her future daughter-in-law. "Well, Xiao Qi, do you have any suggestions?" Xiao Qi gave Su Buling a sideways look, but still discussed the matter. "Kui Zioan is the direct daughter of the Kui family in Yuzhu. There is no harm in settling her in Ziliang. In the future, if the support of the Kui family in Yuzhu is needed, Kui Zioan will be in the middle, and it will be easier to do things. Much more convenient." Xiao Qi's meaning is easy to understand. Most of the alliances between clans are marriages. If the Su family wants to develop in the Central Plains in the future, the support of a powerful family is indispensable. She is already related by marriage to the Xiaolu family. If Kui Zioan is also married, the Kui family will probably fall directly to the Su family if the situation goes bad. As long as 3 of the 5 powerful men stand behind the Su family and want to pull the Song family from the throne, there is only one chance left. Many staff members thought for a while, took a conservative attitude towards this proposal, and did not nod. After all, the Su family is still the Dayu loyal, and King Su has not made it clear that he wants to rebel, saying that these are inappropriate. Su Buling sat next to Xiao Qi and said with a smile, "We will talk about these things later. Kui Zioan is dead, just treat it as an ordinary woman. Don't spread the matter, and don't mention it again in the future. Let's discuss it when it is really necessary." Xiao Qi nodded. Su Yu didn't want to talk too much about this unclear relationship, so he dropped the topic and continued to discuss the war in the east. Speaking of the east side of Dayu, it is nothing more than retreating in 4 bites. During the time when Su Buring returned to Suzhou, the Guanzhong army had already marched to northern Xinjiang and was facing a head-on confrontation with the northern Qi army. The northern Qi dynasty was engaged in a desperate battle to restore the country, while the Yu dynasty was suffering from internal and external troubles and the people were distracted. You can imagine the outcome. Although the imperial court blocked the northern Qi's rapid southward offensive, it could not stop the northern Qi's encroachment step by step. The battle line continued to advance south. Every day, cities, counties, and cities fell, and very few returned from the counterattack. On the other side of Dayu, in Jiangnan, the situation is even worse. After King Wu impeached the emperor, the court was slow to respond. The army to counter the rebellion was not strong enough, but it only fueled the rebels' arrogance. Naturally, Wu King Song Siming would not suppress the rebellion, but instead publicized the emperor's atrocities. The taxes are all collected by the emperor. I am going to kill you all as refugees. I want to help you seek justice, but the emperor will not listen. Wait, all the dirty water is poured on the emperor, portraying himself as a savior for the people, and preparing for the recruitment of rebels in the future. Among them, there is also a rumor that has arisen among the people, saying that Emperor Xiaozong wanted to pass the throne to the second prince, the old king of Wei, and the jade seal had been given to the old Wei king, but the late emperor used the support of the courtiers to seize power by force. He did not obey the imperial edict of Emperor Xiaozong. It alludes to the fact that Songji's lineage was not in the right position and usurped the imperial line of Wei Wang's lineage. This news, in the eyes of discerning people, will definitely be known to be false. It is just one of the reasons to deny the legitimacy of the Song dynasty and the imperial power. But there is no right or wrong in world affairs. History is written by the victors. As long as the usurpation of power is successful, even if Songji holds a real jade seal, it will become fake, vice versa, even if everyone knows it is fake news, it will become true if the situation develops to a certain extent. The only thing that King Su's staff and Xiao Qi who were present could get from this news was that King Wu wanted to recommend King Wei as the new king. Other than that, there were not many points to analyze. Su Buling listened in the study for a long time. With his capable wife here, there was no need to say anything more. After the meeting, Xiao Qi and she returned to the back house, wanting to explain Kui Zioan's affairs to Aunt Lu, the baby. Unfortunately, even if Su Buletinling repeatedly explained that he did not follow his intention of sleeping with mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, Xiao Xiang'er and Xiao Qi didn't quite believe it. Lu Hongluan always stood on the same front as Xiang'er when it came to jealousy. The 3 women gathered together and whispered, not allowing Su Buletinling to listen. The baby didn't care about the baby, and Su Buling had no choice but to leave the yard angrily and go find Neng Yuhi to talk about Kui Zioan. The back palace of the prince's palace is very large, with dozens of courtyards connected in parallel. There are also viewing places such as the Pavilion Lake Garden, where hundreds of maids live, but it still looks a bit empty. Su Buling spent very little time in the palace when he was young. He has never been to many places so far. While walking around, he didn't arrive at the yard where Ning Yuhi lived. Instead, he saw Ning Qingyi facing him on the road between the gardens. Come. Ning Qingyi has a quiet and aloof personality. She wears a thin white dress all year round. With her tall figure and the snow-white Zhao Dan sword in her hand, she looks both fairy and chivalrous. Among the many maids in the palace, it is extremely eye-catching under the background. Ning Qingyi walked quickly and straight, but her expression seemed to be in a trance. When she got close, she noticed Su Buling on the other side of the road. The last time we met Ning Yuhi together, and Ning Yuhi agreed directly, Ning Qingyi was confused. She said that she and Su Buling wanted to be a couple first, but she didn't know how lovers should get along with each other. She had been hiding from Su Buling for such a long time. Buletinling always stayed in front of Chu Chu and Manji, not giving Su Buletinling a chance to be alone in private. When they met on a narrow road and suddenly bumped into each other, Ning Qingyi's face changed slightly, as if she had met an enemy. She turned around and ran away. Qingyi. Su Buling showed a bit of a smile and came to Ning Qingyi's side in a flash, raising his hand to block the way. Why are you running? Ning Qingyi's face turned red imperceptibly, but her eyes were still cold. Get out of your way. Su Buling smiled brightly. We have said that we should be lovers first, but you treat your lover like this? Is it possible that your words are not kept? Ning Qingyi was silent for a moment and snorted lightly. How do you want me to treat you if I don't keep my words? I can't stick to you like Manzi, nor can I obey your words like Miss Song. Su Buling nodded slightly and raised his hand to indicate the way. Let's go for a walk together. Ning Qingyi hesitated for a moment, but did not refuse and followed silently. Master promised you and me things, but I didn't agree. You, don't push your limits. How could I go too far? I only looked at it when you asked me to look at it last time. When you didn't let me look at it, I kept my eyes closed. Ning Qingyi's face turned red suddenly. She raised her hand to cover her chest and did not answer. Su Buling walked slowly and saw that Ning Qingyi was silent and continued. But I was really surprised. Ning Qingyi frowned and said, what's the surprise? Su Buletinling's eyes moved downward. Well, you look thin when you are wearing clothes and you are fleshy when you are undressing. I didn't realize you were so big before. You feel bigger than a full branch. Ning Qingyi's face turned cold, and she turned around and walked back. Su Buling raised his hand to block the way. It's just a joke to adjust the atmosphere. This is how couples talk. Don't take it seriously. Ning Qingyi's eyes were slightly cold. Do you think I'm stupid? You are teasing women. Husband and wife should respect each other as guests. How can you be like this? Su Buling looked a little helpless. If you don't believe me, ask Manzi. If you don't talk like this in private, is it possible to talk about military politics? How can you give birth to a child? Ning Qingyi's face alternated between red and white. She hesitated for a moment, then walked ahead with her head down. I don't like this anyway. If you want to walk, I will accompany you. If you keep talking nonsense, I will go back. Su Buling nodded with a smile, followed unhurriedly, and walked out of the palace together, walking slowly outside the high wall of the palace. Suzhou City is no more than 60 years old, most of the buildings are rough, and the planning and greening are even more unsightly. In terms of beauty, it is not even as beautiful as the county town in Jiangnan. The only advantage may be that it is large, has a wide field of vision, and even two cars can run parallel in the alley. Ning Qingyi held her sword and walked in front with her head held high. After taking a few steps, she noticed that Su Buling was silent and just looking at the scenery. She calmly slowed down and walked side by side with Su Buling. Why don't you speak? Su Buletinling walked slowly and shrugged slightly. You told me not to talk, so of course I shut up. Ning Qingyi's eyebrows furrowed slightly. I asked you to stop talking unabashedly. It's okay to speak normally. Is it possible that your mind is filled with things that cannot be put on the stage? Um. Ning Qingyi almost lost her temper, rolled her eyes, turned around and walked back. Su Buling raised his hand to stop him again and said with a smile. I'm just teasing you. What do you want to say? I'll just accompany you. Ning Qingyi gritted her silver teeth and endured it for a long time before suppressing the chaotic emotions in her heart and said calmly. I have nothing to say. Then we won't talk, but we agreed to be a couple first. They have to look like a couple, right? What do lovers look like? You are not allowed to hold me and chew me, and you are not allowed to touch me, otherwise I will leave now. Ning Qingyi's eyes were wary, and she put her hand on the hilt of the sword, looking ready to draw the sword and strike at any moment. Su Buling looked a little helpless and stretched out his left hand generously. Couples just hold hands, walk from here to the end of the street, and then walk back from the end of the street. It's very simple. Ning Qingyi looked a little confused and looked at Su Buling's outstretched palm. How long will it take? If you don't go back until it's too late, your parents will scold you. Ning Qingyi was confused and thought for a moment, does this make sense? Su Bulenling nodded seriously and hooked his hand. Ning Qingyi hesitated for a moment, looked left and right in the back alley, and after making sure there were no pedestrians, she raised her hand and took Su Buling's wrist, pulling her towards the end of the street. Su Bulenling staggered as he was pulled, and clasped his fingers with his backhand to forcefully steady Ning Qingyi's rhythm. Walk slowly, focus on your hands. Yes, do you feel anything? What do you feel? It's just the feeling of heartbeat, dear bumping around and stuff like that. Ning Qingyi didn't answer, but turned her head to look at the wall on the other side. She twitched her hand to let go, but didn't pull it out, so she let Su Buling hold her hand. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 618. There is a spring under the city, and its water is like wine. Suzhou City is located near Jiquan in later generations. Although it is located in the wilderness of the northwest, there are many water sources in the city, otherwise King Sulai would not expand a new city here. The rumor that the water is like wine may be a bit exaggerated, but the quality of the underground spring water is indeed excellent, and there are also hot springs that are extremely rare in Guan. The hot spring is located in the south of Suzhou City. It was originally a camp for the soldiers who opened up wasteland in front of Jiezi. After the city was built, it was left empty. It was transformed by the palace into a public service facility similar to a park. It was named Canyang Pool, which is considered to be a popular service facility. One of the few scenic spots in Suzhou City. Behind the large Canyang Pond, there are elegantly decorated small ponds built. The largest one is reserved for Prince Su's mansion. Princess Su often comes here when she is there, but it is basically empty at other times. At the end of the first month and the beginning of February, when the weather has not yet warmed up, the water mist in the outdoor hot spring inside the wall is steaming, and clothes of various colors are placed on the shore of the natural pool. Through the mist, you can see a big white fish swimming flexibly in the waist-deep hot spring pool, shouting from time to time. Nightingale, you're not a landlubber, are you? Why don't you come over? On the edge of the pool, 3 girls sat neatly leaning against each other, with the water up to their necks, staring at the naked Zhu Manzi swimming backstroke and butterfly in the pool, their eyes a little strange. Nightingale can walk on water and swim easily, but she is thin and looks like a bean sprout without her clothes. She has no nerve to come up to Manzi to compete in swimming. So what if she wins in swimming? In other respects it is not a complete failure. Zhongli Chuchu was born in the world of martial arts, so she was naturally good at water. The natural advantage of being born in a foreign land made her have the most proud figure among many little girls. Her legs were long and protruding, and her skin was white and moist, with almost no flaws. But Zhongli Chuchu was not as courageous as Manzi, so he had no nerve to swim around in the water in front of his friends. Needless to say, Song Yufu came from a scholarly family. As she grew up, her only chance to get into the water was in a bathtub. She also has a shy and conservative personality. She just took off her skirt and spent a long time hiding behind the screen. Then she went into the water wrapped in a towel and is still holding her arms. Let her swim in the pool, it's better to kill her. Although Zhu Manzi is not tall, she still has an outstanding figure. Her beads are round, white and smooth, and her swimming movements are even more beautiful. However, there was no one to accompany him to play in the water. After waiting for a long time, Ning Qingyi did not come back. Zhu Manzi also gradually lost interest. He swam to Chu Chu, lay down on the stone at the edge of the pool, poured a glass of warm sake, and complained. Xiao Ning went to call Daning and Dazhong. It's been almost an hour, why haven't they come yet? Zhongli Chuchu gently stirred up the water and sprinkled it between the big white balls. He shook his head, maybe my master and Taoist Ning don't want to come over. How could it be? I heard Daning say that she and Xiao Ning used to take wild baths in the mountains. Could it be that this place is not wild enough? As Zhu Manzi spoke, he raised his eyes and glanced at the wall in the distance, frowning. Hey, could it be that Daning likes to be in places without walls? What if someone sees him? Zhongli Chuchu felt that Ning Yuhe was quite wild, even daring to steal men from his apprentices, but obviously these secrets could not be revealed. She smiled lightly and did not answer. Song Yufu didn't dare to move even when she was soaked in the water. After a while, she almost melted. After a moment of hesitation, she said softly, "How about we go back and come back next time?" Ning Qingyi missed the appointment and didn't come. Manzi and Chuchu were also waiting a little impatiently, so they both nodded. After a while, 4 girls who had been soaked in love came out of Kanyang Pond and returned to the palace together. On the way, Zhu Manzi was a little annoyed at Sister Tai's bad faith. This Xiao Ning is really unreliable in his work. He just washes himself if he doesn't want to. He just leaves us here and doesn't care what happens. It's so unfaithful. Zhongli Chuchu shook his head. Qingyi has a straightforward personality. He never says anything. He couldn't be looking for an excuse to leave first. He probably encountered something that delayed him. I just arrived in Suzhou and I don't know anyone. What can happen to her? Zhongli Chuchu thought for a moment, and his green eyes shrank sharply. Could it be that Qingye had bumped into his master and Ning Yuhe serving Su Buling together? Oh my god, Su Buling won't be hacked to death, right? Things are obviously not that bad. Xiao Manzi, who was walking in front and complaining, noticed something out of the corner of his eye. He suddenly stopped and hid around the corner of the wall, making a shushing gesture. Zhongli came back to his senses and walked to the corner of the wall. He stuck half of his head out and looked towards the back alley of the palace. He saw at the other end of the alley, men and women in white clothes, walking slowly hand in hand, swaying and unsteady. There was no rush, the movements were very intimate, and occasionally the man would tilt his head and say something, and the woman would look to the other side, looking arrogant. Zhu Manzi's little eyebrows wrinkled. She was a little unhappy before, but now she was even more unhappy. She muttered. No wonder the Xiao Ning secretly ran away to be with Mr. Su, without loyalty. Zhongli Chuchu's eyes didn't look right either. She pursed her lips but didn't say anything. Behind the two of them, Song Yufu, who had been walking with her head lowered, also took a look. Song Yufu was not surprised to see Su Buling and Ning Qingyi together. She originally wanted to watch the fun. But for some reason, when she stood at the far entrance of the alley and saw the familiar boyfriend, holding the woman's hand and interlocking their fingers, tilting her head to speak, Song Yufu felt depressed for no reason, and so many memories came to her in a flash. Well up in my heart. On the bell and drum tower, she sat at the desk copying the Shuiji, and he urged her fiercely with his head tilted. In the waterside pavilion of Qujiang Lake, she sat on the edge of the terrace holding a wine gourd and coughed softly because of choking. He tilted his head and comforted her softly. From the palace to Zuji Street, the two walked side by side. He spoke warmly, but his words were teasing, making her lower her head and run quickly, not daring to answer. On the big tree sticking out of the cliff of Yufeng Mountain, she accepted the wine gourd and gave him the hairpin. The two leaned against each other, but neither of them spoke to express their feelings. Until in front of the small village of Yuelu Mountain, in the midst of light snow, she mustered up the courage for the first time and said, "I like you." Unconsciously, we have walked so far. Song Yufu looked at the man and woman in white at the other end of the alley from a distance. The distance was too far to hear what they said, nor could she see each other's expressions, but every word she heard in the past echoed in her ears, and she saw every expression of each other close at hand. But for some reason, after leaving the small village in Yuelu Mountain, the memory seemed to stop. All the scenes seemed to be standing behind and watching him riding on a horse, watching him standing on the bow of a boat. It was clearly right in front of her, but her memory was a little fuzzy, even worse than when she was in Yuelu Mountain. At that time, she faced the lonely lamp in the mountains and racked her brains to write a letter. They were thousands of miles apart, but it seemed to be right in front of her, and she could see every subtle look in his eyes when he read the letter. Unconsciously, her vision gradually became hazy, and she could not see the people and things in the distance clearly. After staring for a moment, Song Yufu lowered her head, still folded her hands on her waist, and walked quickly to the front of the road. "Miss Song." Zhongli Chuchu had a very good relationship with Song Yufu. She noticed that Song Yufu suddenly ran away, and shouted with a little doubt, but Song Yufu did not stop, but trotted and just responded, "I'll go back first." The voice was trembling and a little unclear. At the other end of the alley, two people walking hand in hand heard a call from the distance at the same time. Ning Qingyi pulled back his hand as if he had received an electric shock, his face flushed, and he moved away from the side, a little panicked. "Oh no, Shuchu and the others saw it, it's all your fault, you pervert, how can I explain this to them?" Su Buling heard Song Yufu's response, and realized that the voice was wrong. He frowned and turned back quickly, only to see Song Yufu, who was wearing a light yellow skirt, just disappeared on the other side of the alley. Zhongli Chuchu and Zhu Manzi, who had poked their heads out, looked over there, their eyes full of confusion. Ning Qingyi looked back at the alley entrance, and saw this scene, a little puzzled. "What's wrong?" "I'll go and see." After Su Buling responded, he jumped onto the courtyard wall and chased over the house diagonally. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 619. There are few people on the small street beside the palace. Song Yufu trotted with her head buried, her goose yellow skirt rippling gently. After running for dozens of steps, she turned into a brisk walk again. "I don't know why I want to run, I don't know why I feel so upset, I know this is not good, but I just can't stop crying." She really wanted to go back to the Imperial College to study in the morning, or go back to teach in a small village. Although such a life was boring, she was always looking forward to someone in her heart. When she stayed here, with someone in front of her, she had no idea what would happen in the future. Sample. I don't know any martial arts, I don't know how to make suggestions, I don't have a common language with my older sisters, and I can't even speak to a few female heroes of a similar age. I feel like I'm superfluous and shouldn't be here at all. She also wanted to hold hands with Su Buling and chat. She wanted to get Su Buling into trouble like before, or sit on the bell and drum tower and help copy books for the lazy Su Buling. At least that way, she could always talk. 2 sentences. And now, even if she holds hands with Su Buling, what can she say? Perhaps compared with the secret love in the Imperial College and the bitter wait in the small village, she was more afraid of seeing the day in the future when the two people suddenly became relatively silent strangers. If that's the case, it's better to wait foolishly without someone and have something to look forward to than to be disappointed. Song Yufu didn't know why she was thinking about these things. She knew clearly that Su Buling would not abandon her, but she couldn't control her thoughts. After taking a few steps, a familiar voice came from the side. Yufu. Su Buling jumped down from the wall, landed in front of Song Yufu, turned his head to look at her, and took her wrist. Why are you crying? Song Yufu lowered her head deeply, not wanting Su Buling to see the tears in her eyes, and said in a trembling voice. Nothing, ugh. The sobs came out, and they could no longer be suppressed. Song Yufu's nose felt sore and she cried with a cry, raised her arms to hug Su Buling who was close at hand, buried her face in the white skirt, and cried loudly. With a gentle expression, Su Buling raised his arms to hug Song Yufu, who was a head shorter than him, and gently stroked her trembling back. Cry if you want. It's okay. If you have something to say, just tell me. Don't hold it in your heart. Whoa. Song Yufu hugged Su Buling's waist tightly, buried her face in her arms, and wet her clothes with tears. After crying for a long time, I finally calmed down a little and gained the strength to speak. Mr. Su, am I useless? Oh, I can't do anything. Su Buling sighed in his heart, guessing that Song Yufu might have premarital phobia. The day after tomorrow was the wedding day on February 2nd. Song Yufu's father was not here, and there were no relatives or friends around her. She would suddenly lose control of her emotions. It's normal. He should have had a good chat with her, but since he arrived yesterday and has been busy with various things until now, he has indeed been neglectful. Su Buling held Song Yufu and gently shook her, comforting her softly. Why is it useless? I'm even scared when Fuebao becomes powerful. It's just useless, I don't know martial arts. I want to chat with Manzi and become friends, but I can't say a word. I told them everything I know, but I still can't find the topic. Manzi is particularly good at talking, and everyone can chat together, even Mrs. Lu and the others like Manzi. I can't even ride a horse, and I can't make suggestions, I can't even eat, but Manzi is very good at eating, and I can also tell stories. Well. Su Buling sighed softly after listening to the crying words. When it comes to interpersonal communication, Manzi is invincible in the world. Compared with Manzi, anyone else would be autistic. People are so different from each other, each with their own advantages and strengths. If it were you talking about poetry and songs fu and literary classics, Manzi is still at a loss as to who is worse than the other. Song Yufu's cry was much quieter, but she still hugged her tightly. They all know martial arts. I can't understand what they are talking about, but you can understand. I'm afraid that in the future. From now on, you can just chat with me, and we will get married the day after tomorrow. After the wedding, Xiaoqi, Xiang'er and Hongluan will all be your sisters. Xiaoqi and Xiang'er especially like poetry and songs, so you can chat with them. They are older than me and smarter than me. I am the only one. If you don't like me anymore, I might as well go back to Chang'an and help Daddy teach. Su Buling shook his head and smiled, thought for a while, turned around and carried Song Yufu on his back, jumped up the wall, and walked slowly. How could I not like Fuebao? There is nothing terrible about getting married. Haven't you been in love since elementary school? Husband and son, you used to dare to use a ruler to attack me, Why are you so weak now? Your grandfather, uncle, senior brother, and father are all so powerful, I can't afford to offend them, so what are you afraid of? Song Yufu lay on Su Buling's back, her eye circles still red, looking at the white jade hairpin on Su Buling's hair. They are not here, I miss Dad, Grandpa, Bai Shizi and Ah Huang. Don't worry, I will definitely pick them up if I have the chance. Well, I'll write a letter to Yulu Mountain first and bring Big White Goose and Ah Huang over. It's a 800-mile rush and it will only take a few days to get there. Grandpa will definitely not come over. Dad is attending the Imperial Academy's ceremony, so he won't come over either. That's not certain. If it doesn't work out, we'll just go there later. You still don't believe in my ability. Believe it? Song Yufu hugged Su Buling's neck and tried to stabilize her mood. Tears were still hanging on her cheeks, but the corners of her mouth were slightly raised and she smiled. Su Buling then smiled and thought for a while, also, don't just look at the present, take a long-term view. Think about it, I am the heir and I want to marry many wives, so I will naturally have many children. The family must have. Xiaoqi has no idea how to teach children etiquette and rules, and how to read and write, but if she encounters a naughty child, she will definitely be embarrassed to death. Children are all raised to be ignorant and boastful brats like me. He's a dandy. Haha, yes, you are a dandy. And then, Jeju is a doctor and can't even control Choo Choo, so don't expect her to take care of the children. Choo Choo and Kingyi can take care of one child, but if they have more children, they will definitely be troubled. Manzi, the most amazing thing is that if you let her take care of the children, she can go out on the street by herself at the age of 3, listen to books and go to restaurants, and make sworn vows and burn yellow paper with others at the age of 5. Laugh. When Song Yufu heard this, she couldn't help laughing, and she quickly covered her mouth and bumped Su Buling lightly with her elbow. How could you say such a thing about your own woman? To tell you the truth, the only people who can take good care of the children at home are Master and you. Master teaches martial arts and you teach literary talent. If anyone disobeys, I will slap him. The child doesn't dare to say anything. Even I can't reason with you. I can only watch. What is this called? This is called holding a son to command the princes. 30 years in the east of Hedong and 30 years in the west of Hexi. What a mess. Song Yufu gradually calmed down and murmured softly, but her eyes showed a bit of expectation. She looked like she was aroused. She wanted to set up a primary school at home, and then bring her son and daughter over to show off. Fists and kicks. After Su Buling noticed that Song Yufu's mood had calmed down, he stopped on the roof of a building. The two sat shoulder to shoulder, holding Song Yufu's shoulders and looking at the sunset in the distance. Marriage is a lifelong matter. The days to come will be long. When we finish all the work and have some free time, we can sit like this every day. It's just that I can't get away from running around lately and the world is in chaos. If yes, I also want to be like in Chang'an City, fishing, drinking, and going to poetry gatherings to show off every day. That's a normal day. I know, I don't blame you, I'm only 17, I still have many, many years to go. Song Yufu pursed her lips, rested her cheek on Su Buling's shoulder, faced the sunset in the desert, and asked. When will you have a child? How do I know this? You have been with Sister Xiang'er for so long. You should have a child long ago. If you don't, do you want to ask Miss Jeju? I have no problem. Xiang'er is the queen mother. How dare she get pregnant in Chang'an? And having a child before marriage is not good after all. I'm specifically taking precautions. Is it possible to prevent the birth of a child? How to prevent it? How about I show you? I don't. We will get married the day after tomorrow. Then, we'll talk about it then, let Manzi have one first. She's so big. It would be a pity not to breastfeed the child. Hee hee. The setting sun sank into the sea of sand, replaced by a sky full of stars and a crescent moon. Thousands of lights lit up in the city, and the world became silent, as if only the man and woman standing on the top of the building were left dependent on each other. Thank you Tingmiankak for the 30,000 reward. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guangguanggongzi. Chapter 620. On February 2nd, the dragon raises its head. On the auspicious day of the zodiac, the city was decorated with lanterns and colorful decorations. The gentry and officials from all over the 12 states of Ziliang arrived at Suzhou City, the capital, on carriages to celebrate the prince's wedding. The crown represents adulthood and is no longer a child. As the only heir to the princes, he will gradually take over the military and political affairs of Ziliang until the day he inherits the throne. However, Su Buling did not make any grand arrangements on his way down to the south of the Yangtze River when he was crowned emperor. This wedding could be regarded as his formal contact with the 12 states of Ziliang as the eldest son. Logically speaking, for such a big event, the other 6 vassal princes would have to send people over to celebrate, and the emperor was writing a congratulatory message or something. It's just that the whole northwestern part of Shaanxi has been in chaos recently, and the south of the Yangtze River is full of wars. It's obviously not the time to hold a happy event. In order to avoid criticism, King Su did not make any big noise among the border troops during the review, but quietly held a wedding at Prince Su's mansion. In the early morning, before it gets dark, Chun Yan, who got up early, stood side by side on the courtyard wall, curiously looking at the various objects in the huge mansion. Servants and guards were running back and forth outside the mansion, and more than 100 cooks in the kitchen were preparing overnight. Everything was filled with joy. In the back house, in Zhongli Jiju's courtyard, the maid held a tray with phoenix crowns, gold and jade jewelry, and stood quietly in the room, etc. The large room was neatly tidied, with happy words posted and red candles placed. Even the little sparrow was put on a red vest by the considerate nightingale, and squatted on the dressing table with blank eyes, looking at his master. Zhongli Jiju had just come out of the bathtub and was fidgeting in front of the bronze mirror. She was almost held down by her apprentice Chu Chu to prevent her from running away. Zhongli Jiju was so panicked, not because he didn't want to have a formal wedding with Su Buling. Worship is the most important event in a woman's life. The last time I went underground, I randomly found a piece of cloth to cover my head and prayed to the dragon Lokgu. I will never forget it, but after all, something was missing, and it felt like I was given away for free. Zhongli Jiju had secretly been looking forward to this formal wedding for a long time. But early this morning, Chu Chu suddenly ran over and said that she was going to send her master off to get married. She was busy helping to clean up and dress up. Zhongli Jiju knew Chu Chu very well and could clearly feel that Chu Chu's mood was not right. He was embarrassed and worried that Chu Chu could not bear it, so he naturally backed down at this time. Chu Chu, Su Buling, and I have already worshipped each other. We even have a marriage certificate. There is really no need to do it again. There is no family outside, and I don't know anyone. What are you going to do out there? Forget it. Zhongli Chuchu rarely wore a red dress, but changed into a common light green skirt. There was no smile on her face, and she patted her master on the shoulder fiercely. Be honest, can you just let it go over such a big thing as getting married? Zhongli Jiju's slightly foxy face was full of embarrassment, and she shrank her neck. I. Zhongli Chuchu stared at his green eyes, straightened his master's head, and continued to tie his hair. You are usually such a smart person, why have you become stupid now? You are getting married, but you are not selling yourself. You have to pay money for selling yourself, right? It's okay that Su Buring didn't give the village a betrothal gift. I'll organize a wedding for you, but you still have to give me money. Wait, Are you going to live like a maid and a concubine in secret without even having a status? Zhongli Jiju pursed his lips, not knowing how to answer. Zhongli Chuchu put the bride's phoenix crown on the master's head and said calmly, I am your disciple, and I have the same affection as mother and daughter. You don't care about your own affairs, but I do. You are not a lowly girl. You are pure and upright. It is a blessing to marry you. You look down on me so much. I won't be able to call anyone my sister from now on, maybe I won't even be able to offend the maid. Now I live in a big courtyard and will be left behind to do laundry in a few days. I don't underestimate myself, I'm afraid of you. You don't have to worry about me. It's going to rain and my mother is getting married. I can't stop it, and I won't stop you. After today, you will be the daughter-in-law of the Su family, and we will become two families. I can just a few words of advice to you, of course if your wife is bullied in the future, I won't be able to care about it. Well. Zhongli Jiju secretly glanced at his disciple in the mirror, knowing that it was useless to say anything, so he could only sit quietly. On the other side, in Song Yufu's courtyard, the atmosphere was much livelier. In the elegantly decorated boudoir, Song Yufu sat on the wedding bed with a red face. She was wearing a wedding dress and a red dress. She looked like an exquisite porcelain doll. Ning Qingyi and Zhu Manzi had arched eyebrows and helped tidy up their hair buns and jewelry. After 2 days of Su Buletinling's comfort, Song Yufu had relaxed a lot and no longer worried about the unknown life after marriage. It's just that Song Yufu was naturally shy, and she was about to worship in front of a large audience. She still felt a little timid, so she sat down and said softly, Manzi, you really don't want to come in together? I'm the only one, so I'm embarrassed. Zhu Manzi had known Su Buling well for a long time, but her parents were both here. If possible, she would naturally want them to sit beside her and have a complete wedding. At this time he said with a smile, I'm still young, so I'll be with Xiao Ning next time. Ning Qingyi looked slightly annoyed and glanced sideways at Zhu Manzi. Su Buling and I are not talking about marriage, we are just friends. Don't drag me into this. Zhu Manzi frowned, a little unhappy. Xiaoning, you can't say one thing and do another. A few days ago, a few of us saw you and Mr. Su holding hands. That look, Fu Bao was so angry that she cried. Song Yufu's face turned even redder, and she quickly said, I'm not angry enough to cry, there's sand in my eyes. Zhu Manzi said lightly, don't find such lame excuses. Xiao Ning also said that he was practicing Tai Chi push hands with Mr. Su. Do you believe it? Song Yufu glanced at Ning Qingyi, who was blushing, and whispered, I don't know martial arts, maybe. Ning Qingyi bit her lower lip, her face visibly red, but she couldn't explain what happened when they walked hand in hand last time. At the moment, I could only turn my head and pretend not to hear Manzi's teasing. Because Ning Yuhi's relationship cannot be made public yet, and the other girls are not in place, there are only 4 people including Xiao Qi, Xiao Xiang Zhong Jiju, and Song Yufu for this wedding. Compared with Jiju Yufu, the Xiao sisters are obviously much more relaxed. In the wedding room, Xiao Qi had already put on her red dress and sat quietly behind the dressing table, letting Lu Hongluan help her draw her eyebrows. In the middle of the house, Xiao Xiang also put on her wedding dress, holding the hem of her skirt and spinning it in circles with a graceful posture. Xiao Qi saw her sister jumping up and down and said displeasedly, Xian'er, can't you be more honest? You act recklessly during the church visit. If you take off the hijab and let others see your face, it will be a bad thing. I didn't want it to happen. You come to worship together, if Su Buletinling doesn't love you, you should just stay in the back house. Xiao Xiang'er has the status of the Queen Mother, so naturally she cannot be seen in the light, but Su Buling owes the baby too much, and has promised to spend the rest of his life making up for it. A serious wedding must be given. Anyway, at the royal wedding, all the attention is paid to the crown prince and his concubine. They all cover their heads. Even if they don't know their identity, no one dares to ask blindly. Xiao Xiang'er was obviously in a good mood. Hearing her sister's scolding, she said softly, "Sister, you have to change your temper. When you enter the Su family, Su Buling will be the oldest, then me, and then you and Hongluan. You have to call me sister." Xiao Qi paused and looked around, obviously looking for the ruler. Lu Hongluan was slightly dissatisfied when he heard this. "Xian'er, I'm the first to come in. You were the aunt and the queen mother before, so I really have to listen to you. But from today on, you are a member of my Su family. Inside the house, I am older than you, and you can tell the difference between the elder and the younger." Xiao Xiang'er's eyebrows were curved. "Hongluan, I am the first woman in your family. If you really count, I am 1 year ahead of you, so I am naturally the eldest. In addition to being older than me, how else are you older than me?" Lu Hongluan was naturally unconvinced and subconsciously puffed up her chest. "You still have reason to have sex without a matchmaker." Xiao Xiang'er was not false at all. She raised her hand and said, "It's better than some people who support themselves and don't dare to really eat. Hey you." Xiao Qi glanced around twice, picked up the gold support pole for holding the hijab from the table, stood up without saying a word, walked to Xiao Xiang'er, raised her hand and said, "Who's the biggest?" "Ah." Xiao Xiang'er jumped away quickly and rubbed her butt. "Sister is the oldest, I was just kidding." Only then Xiao Qi was satisfied, nodded, and put the weighing pole back. "Hurry up and pack it up. If you miss the auspicious moment, I will let you bring your tail to worship." "Worship with your tail? Don't. Xiao Xiang'er was immediately frightened, and sat back in front of the dressing table obediently, dotting her lips and eyebrows, and began to put on makeup. Lu Hongluan was very relieved. He stood behind him to help tie his hair. He lowered his head and glanced at Xiang'er's tight skirt and said with a smile, "Xian'er, don't you like that? Why don't you give it a try? Bah, you are the one who likes." There was a little noise for a while, and at the auspicious hour, the yard was noisy and a bunch of people came over. Chiao Yi walked in and said happily, "Miss, please cover your head quickly, we are going out." Upon hearing this, Xiao Xiang'er and Xiao Qi quickly covered their heads and sat in front of the bed in an orderly manner.